Norm asked me earlier, he says, did Morgan steal anything from my presentation? I said, well, maybe about 20 slides or so. Not that I'm bitter or anything. Just teasing. Okay, Tower of Babel, Delusions. Some of you know a little bit of the story here. Pastor Darren didn't know what to put down. He put TBD first, and so I just put a title in there to fit with that. But I've been doing a lot of looking at and reading about the Tower of Delusions. One of the places I started, of course, was the Babylon Bee. I went to their archives and found this article here, and it goes, work on Tower of Babel nears completion, and then I can't read any more of it. But so what does the Tower of Babel look like? Artists have several renditions, but do they really know? I didn't think I'd put the names of the artists on this. I did, but I'm not going to give them to you because nobody cares anyway. I think they're good. I did want to see if I could get a tie that had one of these artist impressions on it. Okay. Okay, actually the main source I got from this was Bodhi Hodges, who has he's done a lot of research in the Tower of Babel area and Genesis chapter 10 and Genesis chapter 11. He covers a bunch of it in his book, and I'm not going to cover near what he has in that book. But it was a good book. I like that. Another source I have here is Charlie Clough. Now, Kathy and I, when we go over to Idaho, because we lose a lot of radio or stuff like that, I downloaded some MP3s, usually from Chafer Theological Seminary, so I could listen to the speakers there, and I get some good stuff off of them. Charlie Clough is one of the speakers there, but we'd already listened to the last conference, so I went to the pre-trib because Pastor Andy Woods mentioned it. And lo and behold, Charlie Clough had done one called The Babel Delusion. I said, man, he stole the title. Well, not really. So I, in kind, I went and used his presentation. I stole a couple of slides from him. Only fair, right? No, actually, he had some good stuff, but he went into a different direction from where I'm going. Here's Charlie Clough here. He's got a Bible framework from his church website. Now, he's a former Air Force officer that worked in weather, and so he does a lot of presentations countering climate change and why we don't have to panic about that. And I may talk a little bit about that too. Okay, but one of his slides. This actually isn't one of his slides. I listened to the vice president. She talked about Venn diagrams, so I thought I'd throw one of those in there. Okay, biblical view versus non-biblical view and where there is overlap. Okay, but this is the slide I stole from Charlie. And I really like this one, and it's a little confusing, and I hope you can, I'll try to explain it here. But basically, all right, what did I do there? Nasty stick. Oh, why are you looking down there? Okay, anyway, the blue box, the main blue box there is our observation, our capability to be able to detect stuff. The yellow area is the tools that we use to detect things, because we can't physically, like Webb telescope, that would be one of the things at the top, the telescope that can see further and with a wider range of frequencies than we can to be able to detect things. Or ultra-high filming, we get high-speed. All these tools, microscopes, all these things help us gather information to understand the universe around us. And then the darker blue area is historical accounts. And we have to weigh the evidence that we get from the historical accounts of what's valid, because it's not always there. There's contradictions all over the place. And the big thing is the ages. Okay? And then everything before that is just pure conjecture. It's supposition. So this is historical science versus observational science. Is that the example we have here? So all those pictures that we had up there of the towers had nothing to do with science, but the people who at that time who drew those pictures, they were going with what little information they had, hearing from their pastors, preachers, or whatever, and making guesses on a lot of stuff because they didn't have the information. So what did the tower look like? Did it look like that? Well, we do have some archaeological evidence of what it may have looked like. This is called a stele, I don't know if I can say that right. But it's a archaeological find that is found in Babylon. And this is, let me show this differently. Actually, let me expand that out there. This is Nebuchadnezzar, who is in Babylon much later after the tower was built. And he wanted to tear it down and rebuild it, but he never did. But this diagram is what they had on the stele, so some think that's probably what it looked like, or may have looked like. Now, Alexander the Great, he also wanted to tear it down and rebuild it, but then of course he died before he had a chance to do that. It has been torn down, but they believe they found the footprint to where this thing sat. So here's a drone shot, what it looks like. I'm just teasing, okay? But the thing that gets me about the whole Tower of Babel thing is that God came down, confused them, sent them away. We'll talk a little bit about that. But man's heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? So God tells them to separate and do these things. And why did they build a tower? We're going to take a look at it in a minute. But did they stop building towers? No. We had plenty of towers. Here's a really old one. And here's a really, well, this is a new one, I'm sorry. This is one they want to build in Dubai, and it's supposed to be a city that'll hold 2 million people in one big tower. Now, that's not quite the same thing that they're doing with that, but trying to confine or bring people into just one area. Hold that thought, okay? Here's another tower. Oh, how'd that get in there? I'm not real fond of bird blenders. I mean windmills, okay? Here's one. Actually, the Mansons might be familiar with this. Whenever they travel over to the Manson mansion, they have to pass by this, because this is on I-90 going down into Vantage. Scroll over there and see some more. There's more. Lots of them. So, and then I found this verse, Isaiah 41:29. Behold, they are all a delusion. Their works are nothing. Their metal images are empty wind. You catch that? God hates bird blenders too. Well, actually, let's look at this in the New King James Version. Indeed, they are worthless. Their works are nothing. Their molded images are wind and confusion. So that's about idols. But wait a minute. Isn't there kind of a religious cult right now that kind of associates these as being the saviors for their world? Windmills and bird blenders, and I can't get rid of that. I keep thinking bird blenders. And solar panels. And you've heard about WEF, some of the lunacy that they have. I saw this article in Breitbart. This guy looks like he's fending off trouble or something like that, but he's actually causing this. Because what he says here, this is Yuval Harari. He says, we just don't need the vast majority of population in today's world. And whatever people are still doing, which is useful, those technologies increasingly will make redundant and will make it possible to replace people. So the whole cult there, and I've seen this with a lot of the climate change stuff, is we need to reduce the population to save the planet. Now I put it here in pumpkin spice orange in the background here to emphasize that point there, that last part there. Will make it possible to replace the people. Okay? Here's a problem I have with this, and let's bring it back to the Tower of Babel. Okay? God said 5 times before the Tower of Babel incident, he said, be fruitful and multiply. 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 And do what? Increase greatly on the earth. Spread out. I don't think he was talking about bird blenders. I think he was talking about the people. Now, I've had some people, I've made comments on Facebook or Twitter or something like that, and I get these comments from people that say, because I talk about it killing birds. And they keep coming back with this thing that more birds are killed by cats than by windmills, okay? Well, statistically, I guess they could be right. 2.4 million? Billion, you're right. There's some extra zeros there. I can't count when I'm standing on stage. Morgan had difficulty saying the verse this morning, but I remember my dad used to say, he said, the average IQ of a mob is less than the lowest IQ of the person there. And I keep thinking the average articulation of a person that stands in front of an audience drops as soon as they get up there. And it happens all the time. I memorize verses and you get up here and you're looking at the faces and you're supposed to say something, you go, okay. At any rate, so cats are the main killers. I'd like to see the cat that can do this. All right? So, these are some rare birds, but they say that's okay for windmills because we're getting the power we need. All right. More climate change news here. Here's news break, because we're going to suffer this in Washington. Climate change could cause more stink bugs to flourish in Washington state, according to a new study. We're in trouble now. But I look at the memes that come out about climate change. I said this one just, and that whole first sentence, I'll read it though. If those who believe in climate change are wrong, numerous industries will have been needlessly forced into developing cleaner alternatives. Oh, I'd love to talk about that because that is so off. But I'll defer you to Alex Epstein and Schellenberger for their books and anything by Calvin Beisner on Cornwall Alliance to address that. What I want to talk about is the next part. If those who do not believe in climate change are wrong, we die. And that's the panic that they're teaching us, okay? Let's die. So if we don't do climate change, we're going to die. But if we do climate change or do the green stuff, they're going to want to reduce the population anyway. Hyperbole much? You all know this girl, I think. Okay? I feel sorry for Greta, because she's had to listen to a lot of this and then before. The thing that gets me about this cartoon is I've never seen Greta smile. So I don't know why they've got a smile on her. Okay? Maybe that's a grimace, but I think that's a smile. But I saw this article in the Patriot Post. Young American adults are miserable. And I went and looked at the study that this came from. It was in the Harvard Gazette. And I didn't do him justice with the way I cut off his picture there, because that is not flattering. This is Tyler Vander Weel, and he says, I think political polarization has had a role in this also. Many people feel, how can I live in a country like this, where half the people are terrible? Plus, the last 5 years have been pretty turbulent time. The pandemic, Russia, Ukraine, concerns about climate change. We're all confronting this, but older people have had longer periods of relative stability than those in their 20s. The world probably seems like a more threatening place. But get this, I think social media has contributed to declines in well-being. Past studies indicate that on average, the effects of well-being and mental health are negative, especially in those with high use, and high use is dramatically more common with young adults than others. Also, study after study, theirs also, have indicated that family life and participation in religious communities contribute across their aspects of flourishing, and participation in both of these are down substantially. So I should have advanced that anyway. But they indicate that the family life and participation in religious communities, so they're being general there, but I think the Christian community is the stronger community because we have the hope. I just keep thinking of the whole Bible presentation. We know where we came from. We know where we're going. So we have hope. We're not panicking because we're going to be destroyed by an asteroid or a meteorite or anything like that. So, PragerU, which is not a Christian organization or founded on it, but they do have some wisdom because they seek for the Bible, says the Bible teaches children more effectively than any book ever that they are not the center of the universe. The Bible verse says, train up a child in the way that he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now I've seen things that, okay, that doesn't always happen. The Christian child can walk away from his faith, but there's a grounding in that, and that's up to God. So, the other part of this is The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. So our general nature is to try to suppress truth. And I think that's one of the reasons we have to constantly be in God's Word to try to protect ourselves from that, but also protect others, especially our kids. All right. So back to the Tower of Babel. Morgan will recognize this part here. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words, and as people migrated from the east and found the plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. By the way, I was amazed with Morgan's presentation about really how it segued into this one here and repeated some of the stuff. It's funny how God does that with some presentations. Different speakers, two different topics, doing different things, but there's a commonality in the message. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we are dispersed over the face of the whole earth." Okay, Morgan talked a little bit about this morning. I read an article that talked about, well, Nimrod is the one who's kind of headed this up. I think Nimrod rose to prominence later because he established other cities. Everybody was focused in Babel at this time. By the way, you notice that we still can't figure out how to properly pronounce that, Babel or Babel? It's different. Be arguments all over the place. Okay, but here's the point. Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had bricks for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." Okay, that last part is the one I want to focus on here for a minute. Be dispersed throughout the entire earth. So it's jointly they're saying this. It's not through Nimrod or anything else. And the other thing I've seen people say, well, they wanted to build this tower so that if the flood came, they could go to the top. Well, why didn't they just go in the mountains? Because this tower made of mud brick was never going to be tall enough for them to be able to avoid any kind of flood that devastated the world. And people who are saying that don't look at what the devastation of the real flood was anyway. Okay? So from there we go to Ezekiel 5:5. "Thus says the Lord God, this is Jerusalem. I have set her in the center of nations with the countries all around her." Oh, wait. So here I'm talking about Tower of Babel, and now suddenly why we're in Jerusalem. I want to talk a little bit, and I'm deviating a little bit, which is why I have the squirrel up there. I want to talk a little bit about the center of the earth, because I thought this was cool. Okay? Center of the landmass. Where would that be? Well, Israel, we kind of know the boundaries, and I tried to look for a common presentation of what the boundaries of Israel would look like, and I found several different maps. I like this one the best, but it's big. Israel has never held all that, but it's been promised to them. See if we can get this thing to work now. Yeah. It's slaved onto here for some reason. It thinks this is the primary one. It's not. Okay, but at any rate, all the way on the right, you see Kuwait City, and then stuck in the words along the edge of Israel, the green spot there, you see Baghdad. Right underneath, Abraham traveled from, and there's a star there for Baghdad. Babylon is just above that. And that's where I think that the Tower of Babel was. Babel, or whatever. But the interesting point is this, is that ICR did a study, and I was trying to find the date for this and the original monologue, but I couldn't, or monograph. ICR commissioned a study by a guy named Andrew Woods, not Pastor Woods, who's the Schaeffer Theological Seminary president right now. This is a different Andrew Woods, who is he's a physicist was a physicist with Gulf Energy and Environmental Sciences in San Diego. And he did a study with early computers to try to figure out where would be the center part of the land masses if you just took without worrying about the oceans. So he broke it up into a bunch of squares or rectangles and then figured out, let's see, how do you put it there? Project was sponsored by the Institute of Creation Research for extensive and provided funding for computer time, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Not the part I'm looking at. That's the problem when you put too much on the slide. Well, at any rate, what he determined was that the square that holds, or the rectangle actually, that holds the land of Israel, and it also would include the Tower of Babel, this rectangle here, and I don't know how big it is, because I couldn't find an original monograph or anything with a diagram or a supposed map. There is an article on ICR website that's from 1973 from Henry Morris that refers to this, and it's called Center of Earth, okay? But it's fascinating to me that the coincidence that the ark landed in the center of the landmass to let people go, and the people decided to stay in that center of landmass. I don't believe in coincidences. God did that on purpose. Let's take a little bit of a look at that. Usher's timeline. I like Usher's timeline. I have a lot more confidence in this. I remember when I was a young Christian, and there's a lot of disparaging comments about Usher and the ability of his line, but I've developed a lot greater confidence in that. That reminds me, my brother was telling me the other day, he's a pastor in Virginia, Pastor Vince. He says, they're also broadcasting online too, and he said he had somebody contact him and says, I like listening to you. He says, but I only listen to people until I disagree with them, and then I'm done. And I thought, that's got to be one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. I don't even always agree with myself, especially when I'm looking at stuff that I said before or wrote before or whatever. My mind changes as I'm learning more about God's Word. So I didn't have confidence in Usher's timeline. I have confidence in Usher's timeline now. All right? Creation, global flood, Tower of Babel, Ice Age peaks. And why is that significant? Ice Age time frame here. Michael Ward figures it was probably lasted up to about 700 years, and it's an estimate. We don't have any exact date on that. He's done a lot of work on the Ice Age, and I think there was only one Ice Age, and he talks a lot about that. The secular world feels that there's like 30 of them or something. Lots of Ice Ages, all right? But here's two more slides I stole from Charlie Clough. The one from Michael Ord that talks about the temperatures of the oceans at the time. And when I did the Ice Age presentation, I talked about this too, is that he believes that with volcanic activity during and after the flood, that the oceans had warmed up so that it was, even up in the Arctic area and Antarctic area, it was probably bathwater temperature. 30 degrees C is about 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Nice warm water, which helped keep the valleys where the mammoths live nice and lush. But it put lots of moisture into the air to make the snow and the ice packs. When they talk about the ice ages from the secular side, they have no explanation or mechanism as to how the moisture gets in the air. Because the colder your air gets, the less moisture it holds. So how do you get it up on the earth when the cold air won't take it out of the water? Okay. The other part of this is, where was the ocean level when all this happened? So, get all this snow falling on the land, building up the glaciers, and reducing the depth of the ocean. Well, what's that accomplish? And I put those two together so you can kind of see where the time frame is. But the ocean levels went way down so that we could have places like Doggerland. Who's heard of Doggerland before? Nobody? I like Doggerland. I thought that was pretty cool, but it's a shallow water area between England and the continent, which was inhabited. They have found, they've been able to drag up with nets, they found that there's a civilization, or people who inhabited that area for some time down there in Doggerland, okay? Because the oceans were a lot lower during that time frame. Also, land bridges between Australia, New Guinea, and all the way up to India. And then, of course, this one here that everybody talks about where the Native Americans came down into, well, to become Native Americans, okay? The thing about that is that people could have also taken boats. And they weren't like cavemen who said, "Oh, I built a canoe so I can go out in the water." I mean, they came off the ark, and these people, well, some of them, they'd heard stories. They probably would have had some technology to be able to build some boats so that they could travel around. But the decrease in the oceans to build the land bridges would allow the animals to come across and to populate. Now, they followed God's command, multiply and fill out the earth. And they spread out from the ark area all over the place, okay? So let's go back to the people and talk about how many people were there at the time? How many languages did they end up with? And what's going on there? Today, they estimate that there's about 7,151 languages. Well, how many people were there? Let's talk about that for a minute, because we'll have to guesstimate that. I think this also includes Klingon. Of course, it's a made-up language, but it's official. It's official language. I remember when I was a kid, I read a book called Tarzan. But the copy I had a few pages in the back that had the vocabulary for Tarzan from the ape language. So Tarzan was white ape. Tar being white. Okay, Edgar Rice Burroughs, who figures? And Zan being ape. So white ape. I can't remember what the other parts of it. I tried to learn Tarzan speak, but I don't remember any of it. Not that it matters, or anybody else would be able to communicate with me on that. Okay? But Bodie Hodges works with the Table of Nations and builds out the trees. Now, he's fascinated with the trees, and I'm starting to get to like them. You know, my eyes still glaze over when I'm starting to read some of that stuff, but it's making more sense now. Okay? So he talks about that. In fact, what he's done, and a lot of the royal lineages paint their lineages or trace their lineages back to some of the names that are on this list in the bottom and up further. So through his mom, he was able to trace back that he's related to Queen Elizabeth. He's like the 39th cousin or something like that. So he bragged about that. But then we're probably all related some way there too, okay? And he says, I think he said that he was the 129th cousin of Jesus. He says, but we're all related that way. He says, if we can trace ourselves to one of these lineages, and the Europeans were good with this, it goes all the way back to Noah. Further evidence of the validity, I think, of the Bible. So Henry Morris calculated a possible population of the Babel citizens at around 16,000. Charlie Clough on his slide had that formula and calculation of how he did that. My eyes glazed over when I saw that. I tried to understand it, and I thought I could get to it, but I said, I can't explain this. Okay, but an estimate of 15,920 is what he came up with. And what's that based on is this chart here, how many children that they had over a certain period of time, and how many generations we had to Peleg. Peleg being down here in the bottom left, which leads over to the arrow to Christ. Okay? So, how many generations and how many kids from these generations? So it came up with an estimate of 15,920, or roughly 16,000. Okay? So I put those in with the populations that we're familiar with. Seattle has 762,000 people. Fort Lewis has 14,654. So the closest we have is Ferndale, 15,774. Port Orchard, 16,475. Anybody been to these places? They're not big places. But if you have 16,000 people, roughly, and Bodie Hodges figures that there's probably 72 different family groups languages. Linguists, other linguists have estimated that there's anywhere from 70 to 90 language groups. By that I mean that there's 17,000, or what is it, 17, what did I say that was? 7,000, excuse me, 7,000 language, but they can be narrowed down because of commonalities between them. You know, English is part of the Germanic language. I don't know German, I knew some German. If you take a look at some of the Old English, I can't understand Old English either, because it changes. It goes out, but there are roots that are common. And that's what he was talking about here. So, estimated 70 to 90 languages, and assuming 16,000 people, the average family group that would have, or the average family group, if there's 70 languages, would be 228 people. Whoops. If it was 90 languages, it'd be 178 people. Now that's an average. If it is 16,000 people, how many people would you know, 150 to 200, 300 people in a family group? So when they split off from the Tower of Babel, some speak in one language, some speak in another, so they could go off. But that's enough of a group of people to have a tribe to go someplace to do something, to accomplish something. But they'd have to split off because they didn't understand anything. Question comes into the written part. We can be pretty sure that there's a written language before then, because Moses refers to the written language before the flood. So they probably knew about writing. Were they able to read it? Don't know. So they had to come up with their own vocabulary in writing then. I understand that Korean is one of the easiest languages to learn how to write. The only problem is you have to know Korean first, because each symbol tells you how to form your mouth to say that part of that word. I thought, oh, that's kind of unique. Anyway, that's a side point, okay? Now, so we have, you know, I should have written down how many family groups there would be populating, going out. Bodie Hodges covers a lot. Actually, Arthur Custance, in his book in the 1920s, I think he wrote this. We have a copy in the library. Well, actually, it's not there right now because I'm borrowing it. But he talked about the migrations just on historical evidence of what we had. Bodie Hodges uses from his evidence. Nathaniel Jeanson, who I mentioned a couple of presentations ago, has done a book called Trace, where he follows the genetic trails. So we have historical data of where some of these family groups went to. Then we have language groups, where some of the language groups went to. And oh, by the way, people can learn different languages, so if they get captured, all the reasons for migration, people being pushed out, war, slavery, people have to learn different languages. The DNA stays with the person, but the language can change. Okay? All right, so I depressed you enough here. Let's see. No, we don't need to go through that. God has told his people, oh, we already went through that. Paul here says in Philippians, therefore, my beloved, as you've always obeyed, so now not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. What I wanted to put here was, and I may not have developed it correctly, but it depresses me to see, even though they split out, they still try to disobey. And we saw the verse where it talks about man tries to suppress righteousness. And we're stuck with that too. But Paul encourages us here to obey. And how do we do that? Well, of course, let me use an Awana verse here. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of the truth. So that's just a start. That's not just for Awana. It's the Awana verse, but I think everybody needs to be prepared to do that. So, Important stuff. Okay, let's go ahead and close in prayer. Holy God, again, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the blessings you bestowed upon us. We thank you for the work that you're working within our hearts. And we pray for the opportunities that we have to encourage each other to learn more about your plan and to share your message of the good news of the hopeful message that you've given us to those, especially to those young people who are not hearing it now. They're hearing other messages and they don't have that hope. That they might see the hope that you've given us and that we might be able to share that with them. In his holy and precious name we pray. Amen. Okay, with that, you're dismissed.